Okay, so thank you so much for letting me speak about my OCIA experience today. Most of you probably know what OCIA is, whether you've grown up within the Catholic Church or went through it yourself. Actually, I see some of my classmates here today. I really want to speak to those who may not know what OCIA is or might be considering that program for themselves. I believe my hope is to help answer the question, why go through OCIA? And part of that answer is why the Catholic Church. My class had 13 people, including my husband, each of us from different walks of life. Some came from other Christian denominations, other from little or no religious background, but felt the call to the church. As for me, I was introduced to Catholicism as a child. My grandparents were devout traditional Catholics. They married shortly after World War II, raised 11 children on a farm in Mount Pleasant, and my father and his siblings have all the stories from Catholic school back in the 60s, including the scary nuns who liked their rulers. To this day, I'm still unsure why I wasn't raised in the church. Part of me thinks that life hit my father harder than he would care to admit, and that there was truly evil in this world that got him down. In his late 20s, he moved to California. He met and fell in love with my mother. They were married, had 2 daughters. They baptized both me and my sister in the Catholic Church, and we went to church on Sundays, sometimes. When we moved to Michigan, those few Sundays turned into only Easter and Christmas, and eventually faded to nothing except for weddings and funerals. Now, don't get me wrong, I still knew God. They still taught me about him. When my sister and I were young, we read story upon story of Jesus. When I went to high school, I joined a youth group with a Methodist church, though that was also mostly because my friends had. When I got older, it was always in the back of my head that I wanted to start going to church. It was often on my mind, but I always had excuses. At first, it was because I would work late night Saturdays or work on Sunday mornings. Then I was just too busy and didn't want to make time. No one was really pushing me to go to church, and I was a believer. That was enough, right? When I got older, on August 22nd, 2023, my journey with God changed. It was a normal Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my desk at work. My phone rang. I picked it up, not thinking much about it or even looking to see who was calling me. It was the second worst phone call I had ever received in my life. My dad's coworkers were calling to ask if I'd heard from him. He hadn't shown up to work in the past 2 days, which was abnormal for him, and they couldn't get a hold of him. The worst phone call I ever had in my life was 2 hours later, sitting on the porch of my family home, calling my little sister in her apartment in Miami to tell her that my dad was gone. There are moments I remember from those days to follow. My best friend sitting on the couch next to me, pushing a burger in my hand, telling me to eat. My husband in the next room, handling phone call after phone call. My 5-year-old cowering from the church bells and clinging to me, asking why Grandpa was in heaven. Sitting in the front pew of the church, watching as hundreds of people, mostly people I didn't know, walk up and take the Eucharist, and knowing I couldn't. They always say that in the end, the only thing you regret are the things you don't do. I'm not sure if I fully believe that. I'm sure there are plenty of things that people do regret doing. However, I do believe that the things you don't do are what you focus on. I regretted not spending every weekend shopping at garage sales after we promised to do it again after Memorial Weekend. I regret not telling him I was pregnant with my 3rd baby, even though I was 11 weeks along, and I regret not being able to participate in or even understand what was happening during his funeral. This was really just the start of the Holy Spirit guiding me to God. A few weeks later, I'd been back at work for just a couple of days. It was my 30th birthday, and I was mostly just down and looking for a goal or something to look forward to. I walked into work, and the nicest person I've ever met in my life said, "Happy birthday," and asked me how my day was going, and I turned to her and I was like, "Mary Ellen, what is the best thing that you accomplished in your 30s? I just wanted a goal, wanted something to think about." She is someone that I love to talk about with family. She's got 2 grown kids, several grandkids, and I love talking to her about travel. She's been to some really exciting places. But in that moment, she just paused, looked me in the eye and said, "I found God. I found my church, I found my community. That was the biggest thing that I had accomplished in my 30s. A few weeks after that, October 7th, 2023, I was sitting right here in these pews at St. Pius. One of my husband's lifelong friends was getting married. Been about 6 weeks at that point since I was in a Catholic church for my dad's funeral, and I was still just going through the motions. I didn't really feel mentally prepared to be there, but I wanted to support our friends. I, of course, had been to Catholic weddings before. I wasn't fully mentally prepared to sit in a Catholic wedding either at that time, but I'd never been to a wedding that was presided over by Father Stephen. After a Lord of the Rings reference and tears shed for our commitment together, our friends' commitment to each other, I started envisioning what it might be like for my family to attend St. Pius. Then I got busy again. 2 little kids and one on the way, working full-time and handling my dad's estate. I was exhausted. Church was the last thing on my mind. Our son was born in March of 2024, and we closed on my family home 2 weeks later. I could finally breathe again, and as my maternity leave was approaching its end, I turned to my loving husband, Jacob, and I said, I want to go to church this week. He didn't even hesitate, and he said, great, which one? And I proposed driving 45 minutes to St. Pius, as we had both enjoyed our friend's wedding here and wanted to see what Mass was like. We walked into the 10:30 a.m. Mass with our 3 kids in hall and not really sure how this was going to go with them. Our oldest cowered at the bells while we were walking from outside, so it started off great. We were sitting in the far back pew, like way back there, guys. And one of my coworkers / good friends, Marley, walked in. I had no idea that this was the church she attended, and we chatted, and she sat next to me, even though she prefers to sit in the front pew over here. She rarely comes to the 10:30 a.m. Mass, actually, and she usually attends the earlier one, but illness with one of her kids had her and her husband dividing and conquering that day. It was a beautiful Mass. The kids did surprisingly well, though we do fully take advantage of the wonderful people in the nursery these days. We got to the homily, and when Father Stephen said, here's the problem. Someone who tries to be spiritual but not religious, spiritual and not attached to a church, that spiritual life will die every time. We need Jesus and the church. We need Jesus and the sacraments. He was talking to me in that moment. He spoke about the importance of the Eucharist, how it connects to Jesus, that we cannot make excuses or allow other things to become distractions or be more important than God. He, of course, then makes a NFL draft reference. If you want to hear it, it's on the St. Pius YouTube channel from back in April 29th, 2024. He then actually went on to tell a story about himself in seminary studies, and he was talking about a conversation with his rector. The story was about how he loved sports but couldn't play them due to past injuries. The father then told him that he believed that that was God's work, not that he caused them, but he allowed them to happen. Because Father Stephen needed that push to get where he was today. The next morning, when I got to work for the first time in 6 weeks, the very first thing I did was pulled up my personal email and contacted Rosemary to set up a time to talk about OCIA. I took the step to reach out because I decided to recognize what God was telling me. I don't think he took my father to push me towards him, but I believe he let it happen. I believe that it was while I was pregnant with baby Jace because he wanted me to focus on caring for myself and my family while I was grieving. He guided me to that conversation with Mary Ellen where she reminded me that I could still find God, find my church, find communities in my 30s, that it wasn't too late to start looking. That is really never too late to start looking. He had me attend a wedding shortly after my dad's funeral to remind me of the beauty in the church and in the world. He had Marley cross paths with me that Sunday morning to let me know that I wasn't starting from scratch and building a community, and she ended up being my sponsor through the OCIA experience. That Father Stephen's homily was a reminder that all the excuses I had been making for years and years, I needed to stop making them. He had given me a husband who could recognize when I make a decision, nothing is going to change my mind. Not only did Jacob support me when I turned to him and told him what I wanted, he continued with me on this journey. Our kids have now been baptized in this church, and he himself was baptized this past Easter. We have found church, we have found community, we have found our God. That is what OCIA is truly all about. Everyone has a different experience, everyone has different reasons, but in the end, it's about being with Jesus. Why the Catholic Church? The Catholic Church stems from Jesus, and all Christian religions stem from this church. I'm not sure what brings you to St. Pius today, but if OCIA class is something you are considering, reach out to Katie, Daryl, or Angela, the amazing team, and everyone who helps out with that. If you've been waiting for a sign or a reason, take this as your sign. Don't make excuses. God will have your back in this decision. Take this step to become a child of God, a child of Christ. You won't regret it, because in the end, we don't regret the things we do. We only regret the things we don't. Thank you.